Good day and welcome to the last Shebeen that will be hosted by the 2020-2021 Legal Shebeen EC. I am Zipoze Tumedu and today we will be discussing whether the COVID-19 vaccine should be made mandatory. I am joined today by two panelists. We firstly have Dr. Bakang Molebogang Tani, a medical doctor by profession who graduated from the University of Limpopo with a Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery. She is currently practicing as an esthetician at the Dr. George Mukari Academic Hospital. We also have Mr. Manu Swart, who is currently an assistant lecturer at the University of Pretoria in the Department of Public Law. He graduated from the University of Pretoria with BA Law and LLB degrees.
Now, just to give you a little background information before we start off with the questions. So it has been over a year since the World Health Organization declared the outbreak of COVID-19 to the public health emergency of international concern. Now, since then, the world has experienced much uncertainty as a result of changing COVID-19 evidence, new and emergent strains of the virus, and ever-changing landscape of travel bans and lockdowns. However, as the acquisition and rollout of COVID-19 vaccines gain momentum, tensions are also growing, specifically related to supply-related challenges, trends of vaccine nationalism, associated inequitable vaccine access, both within and across countries, and most importantly for today's conversation, emerging COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy. So the University of Johannesburg Center for Social Change, in collaboration with the Human Sciences Research Council, have been conducting COVID-19 democracy surveys, which looked at vaccine acceptance and hesitancy in South Africa. So according to their fourth round of surveys, the headline findings were that the overall rate of vaccine acceptance was 72%, up from 67% recorded in the previous round, which was conducted in late December 2020. Now, this figure includes those who have had the vaccine already, who would definitely get the vaccine, and who probably would get the vaccine. Now, the survey collected results from 7,889 people between 25 June and 20 July 2021. Most answers were gathered via Moya, a messaging application used daily by 800,000 people that does not charge for data use. And these responses were supplemented by a telephonic survey of 258 people over the age of 60 to ensure a more demographically representative sample. Now, from this larger sample, 2,370 responses were randomly taken to produce the analysis. Another survey was done in July by the National Income Dynamics Study Coronavirus Rapid Mobile Survey, which found that vaccine acceptance had risen among their sample of 5,000 respondents. So between February, March 2021 and April, May 2021, the share of people who would accept a vaccine rose from 71% to 76% according to this survey. Now, according to the Health Minister, Joe Phaahla, the government has enough capacity to administer 300,000 to 400,000 vaccinations per day throughout the country. During the past 2 weeks of October, South Africa averaged about 154,924 doses administered each day. The government aims to vaccinate 70% of the adult population by December 2021, and currently, almost 13 million adults have received at least one vaccine dose. More than 9 million people have been fully vaccinated with a single-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine or the two-dose Pfizer vaccine. The survey that we will particularly focus on is a survey that was carried out by the Human Sciences Research Council and the University of Johannesburg, as it has the latest results and the most respondents in comparison to other prominent surveys focusing on vaccine hesitancy and acceptance. Now, the survey identified some key demographic and other influences on vaccine acceptance, and attitudes towards taking the COVID-19 vaccine were found to vary by race, age, education, and political factors. And now the most common reasons, according to the survey, why people refuse to vaccinate include concerns about side effects of the vaccine, doubts in the vaccine's effectiveness, lack of trust in the vaccine, needing more information, or just general statement of just being unsure, and explanations related to conspiracy theories are relatively low. Now, going on to our first question, which is aimed at you, Doctor. Can you please tell us what is the efficacy of the vaccine against other emerging variants of the virus?
So can I just say hello to everybody? Just a little question about a little update on my profession. So I am a medical doctor by profession. And I see it said that I practice as an esthetician. I practice as an anesthetist. Okay. At Dr. George Makari. So my regarding vaccines, I'm not a specialist, so that would be more suited towards a virologist. So I will tell you from a medical practitioner's point of view, and this being a generalist. I have treated COVID patients. I am exposed to COVID patients now. Where I used to work in ICU, so then I used to directly treat COVID patients, but at the moment I don't. Now, I will tell you what the efficacy of the vaccine against other emerging variants is just the same as what has been presented to us. So depending on whether the government decides to use one vaccine over the other depends on a whole lot of stuff. So one of them being the efficacy of the vaccine in this case, I think the government has rolled out the Pfizer and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but that depends on how accessible it is to the government and whether, because we must remember something, let me just give you a little background on how vaccines are made. I think then you better understand why we would choose a certain type of virus over the other. So with vaccines is you take what, not the virulent part of the, so think of it like this, we have a virus, there's a virulent part that causes all these, you get symptoms from it. And then you get a part when they create a vaccine introduced to the part of the disease that is not gonna cause the disease per se. So the whole point is for you to elicit an immune response so that your body makes memory cells. And with those memory cells is that if you are exposed to the disease at a later stage, then you have memory cells that are already working in your system to fight the virus. So that's how it is. So in terms of efficacy of the vaccine, the ones that we have, Johnson & Johnson, have been proven to work against the current variants that are currently emerging in our country. Also with the Delta variant. So like I said, I hope I'm answering your question in terms of the efficacy. So it's known to kind of cover that. But remember, even with the COVID vaccine, it's made from coronavirus that is, you have an original coronavirus, but then because it mutates. So the ones that we currently have, according to the data that we have been given, is that they are going to be effective against the variants that we have. So I hope I'm answering your question. If anybody has a question is not unclear as to the efficacy. So at this stage, we think with the variants that we've experienced, the variants that have been identified in South Africa, the Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer have been proven to be effective in preventing severe disease. But I can say, also in my professional capacity and what I have experienced in terms of treating COVID patients, there are some patients that, even though they were vaccinated, that did end up demising from the disease. But you must remember, we're still studying this coronavirus. It's a fairly new virus that we are studying. And if you had to weigh the pros and the cons of which you're taking a vaccine with whatever side effects that we think we're going to expect, versus a person who's not vaccinated and takes the risk of acquiring the COVID virus. So the vaccine end of it seems more safer in terms of that we're preventing severe disease. And that's what we're scared of with us going from one level to another and changing the levels. So the current vaccines we have, to answer your question, one, is that they are effective with the variants that we have at the moment. As to whether the future variants that we will have that are emerging in other countries and they come to South Africa, as to whether it will be effective, that I cannot say, and there hasn't been studies to prove that it will be effective against all the variants, because the virus is mutating. as time goes on. Hopefully, I hope that answers the first question, hopefully.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Tani. It does. Which brings me to the next question. I think you just touched on a little bit into it, but what is the criteria that the government uses to compare different COVID-19 vaccines, and what distinguishes them from one another? If you could just briefly just go answer that question again in more detail.
In terms of the criteria that I know, and I'll tell you from the standpoint that I have, is that the criteria is the vaccine relevant in our setting as South Africans? Can the government afford it? And also we get our mandate from the World Health Organization. So it's not something that the South African government sits and decides, we're gonna go okay with these certain vaccines over the other one. With us, hence why the Johnson & Johnson came in, when they were giving it to medical professionals initially, it was still going through a study. So it wasn't everybody had to sign, but we had from saying, we give consent to take this vaccine, but it's still under, it was still under a study. So it was more like, I don't know, how do I, when it was offered to health professionals back in March, is that it was still under a study. Of course, now we know more the Johnson vaccine. So we're not at the study phase. It's where it's been proven to be effective to prevent severe disease. So if I had to say the criteria that the government used, whether the World Health Organization has endorsed the vaccine as being safe with whatever COVID-19 variants we have. Another thing is you consider cost and accessibility. Also, will you be able to store the vaccine in such a way that, remember, if it's a vaccine that needs a cold chain, can it reach areas that are deep down in the rural areas, that can it reach those people in time for it to be effective, like the efficacy. So those are the criteria that we use. Is it relevant to the current we have that are circulating within our country? Another thing is you consider cost and accessibility and storage in terms of it. So in a nutshell, that's what the government kind of uses as a criteria, but we get our mandate first and foremost, we get it from the World Health Organization. If you go through the World Health Organization website, you will see not just Pfizer and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines are the ones that are also endorsed. But in our current setting in Africa, considering the cost and where we would get it from, then I think then we decided, as the government, it was decided Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer would be the most appropriate for us. But maybe in the future, we will have other sorts of vaccines. And just to say, I know the Johnson & Johnson is a single shot, and the Pfizer is a vaccine where you would need a booster. You must remember something, there's different pharmaceutical companies that make these vaccines. It's the same with any other medication. An example would be you have the pain tablets like paracetamol, but you have different using it, but they need to have, so if I'm saying I'm prescribing you 1 gram of paracetamol, whether you're gonna buy from Adcock Ingram or it's a Pfizer paracetamol, there's certain, how do I put it? In what pharmaceutical companies make with those different medications is it differs from preservatives that they add. So with them, I think with the Johnson & Johnson, it's a single shot. The research from Johnson & Johnson has proven that immune response. But with the Pfizer, you will take 1 shot and then you will need a booster within a month. But as to whether that will cover you and whether in the future we will need a booster, either for the Johnson & Johnson or the Pfizer, that's still under study. And we're studying it as we identify the different variants that are coming into the country, and that helps us decide as to whether we will do a tighter level of whether you have enough memory cells for you to actually whether you need a booster or not. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the hepatitis B vaccine. It's almost the same as that, where you need 3 boosters over 3 months. But even then, you do a tighter level within 5 years to check if you would need a booster. So I think without guidelines, we are headed towards that direction. So we will need a booster or not, whether the vaccine will cover you for life. It's something that I think as time goes on and research has been done on the COVID, then we'll know about it. But at the moment, it's just going to be a single shot for the Johnson & Johnson has been found to be effective, and is also the Pfizer vaccine as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, definitely does. And moving on to you, Mr. Swart, it's quite evident that making vaccination mandatory infringes various rights protected in the Bill of Rights. Now, one of the factors to be considered before such a right can be limited under Section 36 of the Constitution is whether there exists a less restrictive measure. Question is directed to Mr. Swart. So as I was saying, now can it be said, right, that the government has exhausted all other less restrictive measures in order to achieve its purpose?
Okay, Zipuzeto, it is a bit of a loaded question, and if you will allow me, I just want to highlight a few aspects that we have to take into the question, because I don't think that the answer can be a simple yes or no. When we are speaking of a mandatory vaccination, the first thing we must ask is, what does mandatory mean? And who is enforcing the mandatory vaccination? Who is enforcing it? Now, what I mean with that is, if a university, for example, University of Pretoria, as we know, UCT has now done, states, for example, they are not intending to do that, but if they should change it, you cannot come back onto campus unless you are vaccinated. Now, then mandatory does not mean we put you in handcuffs and jab you in the arm. Mandatory means we are withholding something unless you do something else. So that's the first thing. What do we mean if we say mandatory? The second question we have to ask is, who is the person, be it a juristic person or natural person, enforcing the mandatory vaccination policy? The reason here is the following. When we look at the Bill of Rights, you are quite right, there are an unlimited amount of rights that can be limited by a mandatory vaccination. Can you all hear me? I see the doctor is having some issue with her audio, but are the rest of you okay? Zibu,
yes, I can hear you.
All right. All right, wonderful. So there's a wide variety of rights that will certainly be limited, and it will differ from time to time. The first thing we have to understand is Section 8 of the Constitution, which deals with application. Now, you will know, I trust, that the rights in the Bill of Rights have both horizontal and vertical application, meaning it binds citizen to state, but also citizen to citizen. But that is not done in the same way for everyone. So what does this mean? This means that our state, the state in a general, much higher onus guards against the rights in the Bill of Rights than natural persons. Let me give you a very short example. Let's say equality, Section 9. The University of Pretoria is an organ of state. Section 8 of the Constitution clearly says bound by the Constitution. That means that the University of Pretoria cannot discriminate on the basis of any of the sections mentioned in Section 9(3). Now, we know there is equality. Equality also binds us on a horizontal level, but it does not to the same extent. Otherwise, this would mean if you were to find a romantic partner, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you would have to prove that you took into account everyone, no matter their race, creed, color, religion, or gender, and we don't do that. There's something quite as simple as a gender, as a sexual orientation, meaning you are only all women or perhaps both in certain circumstances. So rights binding us horizontally are a lot less strict applied than vertically between us and the state. Now, I think, again, when we look at the categories of to whom it will be made mandatory, we'll have to look at the specific facts and discuss it in the context of that and in the context of Section 36. I'm going to give you a few short examples. I'll keep my answers as short as possible. The first is, let's look at the University of Pretoria. The situation is going to look very different between making a mandatory vaccination for personnel and a mandatory vaccination for students. Why? What does the Constitution require to limit rights? Two things: a lateral appetite to every and proportionality analysis. But the proportionality analysis is a question that we ask on a case-by-case basis. I'm going to give you an example. The University of Pretoria forcing students to get vaccinations, I think personally, is a little bit dodgy. I'm not sure that will meet the requirements. Why? Because if you are, from my understanding, if you do not get the vaccination, the person you are endangering the most is yourself. You yourself. Yes, you are less likely to transmit the disease if you are vaccinated. But if I am vaccinated and you, Zipo, are not vaccinated, I am still protected by the vaccination. The person most in danger, and the doctor can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the person most in danger of not getting a vaccination is the unvaccinated person. The second thing is, if we look at personnel, we have maybe one lecturer, maybe two teaching each and every course. Now, let's take Professor Botha, he teaches legal interpretation. If Professor Botha falls ill, it is a massive disappointment of Pretoria. The students cannot go to class. Nobody will teach RBW. The same is not true for a single student that falls ill. It can carry on. So it's going to be a question. I think you can make a very strong argument that the personnel are subjected to a mandatory vaccination, or the medical every single day with COVID patients need to have a mandatory vaccination, but not simply all students. Then remember, if it is a private setting, if it is a coffee shop, saying, listen, you are not sitting here if you are not vaccinated, or a club, you are not coming in here, they do not owe the same amount. They do not owe the same amount of constitutional rights to you as the state does, or an organ of state. I can absolutely tell you that no court will find in your favor if I, Marnus Swart, make a rule and I say, no unvaccinated person will come into my flat. I will not have an unvaccinated person here. I can assure you no court is going to find in your favor if you challenge that rule, because it is very personal to you. But if the university says that, I think it changes. The point is, the question of less restrictive means is going to depend on a case-by-case basis. You are going to have to prove it in every single situation. For example, people who take care of the elderly caretakers, make an argument that that the mandatory vaccination there outweighs the benefit, outweighs the harm. But the preschool teacher, I'm not so convinced. So I can't give you a definite yes or no answer. It is not something that can be dealt with blanket. It's going to have to be on a case-by-case basis, and the question will be, what does mandatory mean? Being infringed on. If UP says, for example, can't come onto campus, but you can do online learning, versus you can't study. Secondly, what is the purpose? The proportionality analysis.
Thank you.